Welcome to the TechCaptains podcast. I'm your host, Ron Danenberg, and I'm joined by my co-host today, Gareth Thomas. And we have a special guest who is a true innovator in the Fintech industry, Gilad Bonjack. Gilad, how are you today?
Good. Thank you for having me. It's exciting.
Good. So Gilad is at PayEm, VP product. He will tell us more in a few minutes about PayEm, and you're here with us to share a wealth of knowledge and experience that you've had. We'll be diving into some of the product aspects of the PayEm's platform, what you've been building, how it works, how you prioritize everything, you plan the roadmap, the different challenges that you have, and how you see the future of fintechs. So to start this conversation, I don't know if you can maybe tell us in 2 minutes a bit more about PayEm itself.
Sure. So PayEm is an end-to-end spend management platform for SMBs. We basically help companies run and manage all their expense from handling all the requests that come in from employees to different spend, issuing purchase orders to vendors, handling all the incoming invoices and paying them on a global scale, or issuing virtual credit cards to handle these requests. And of course, everything is reconciled and synced to the ERP. So finance teams can have a single system where everything flows and runs on. And we also give them a very good overview of their budget before it actually occurs, and allow budget owners to make educated decisions about whether or not to approve different spends before they actually happen.
I see. And can you tell us more about the product development? If you can walk us through the product development lifecycle at PayEm, and how do you go from concept to launch? Because obviously today the organization has grown quite a bit, which I think the last time I checked was 200 or 75, people. Not 200 just yet, but you'll get there. But 75 is already quite a big number.
Yeah, so we're split. The product team is split between two different domains, basically, or two different sides of the platform. One is focusing more on the core experience, and the other is the end-to-end flows of different elements. We manage our roadmap on a quarterly basis, and the way it's built, the way it's structured is there are company goals. Everything starts from a company goal, what the company wants to achieve in a certain time frame, either a quarterly, a month, a yearly, 6 months time period, and so on. But this is our North Star when it comes to managing or deciding on the roadmap items, and everything has to align with that. So this is how we set our. That's how we start to plan our different items for the roadmap. And of course, we are in close touch with our customers and different prospects that come in, and that proximity helps us shape and then decide on the different initiatives that we want to tackle. Once an initiative is decided on, so once the direction is agreed on, the PM will then go in and put together a one-pager that describes what the problem is, what we're really trying to solve. That's probably the most important element in that one-pager, so everyone will be aligned on the problem, and some details around why it's important on a business level and how we plan to tackle it in a broad kind of way. So without getting into the all the different elements of it, just a high-level overview of the user journey, where it starts, where it ends, and what the success criteria would look like for that feature. It then goes on to be further developed or expanded on the PRD together with the design lead and the engineering manager. And once it has more substantial, it contains more and more details in it, we will kick it off with the rest of the team and kind of break it down to different elements.
And then, so it sounds like you have the kind of OKR KPI process from the sort of top level, by the sound of it. Is that right?
Yeah, but not strictly the OKR methodology in a strict sense. It's more of a guidelines to where we want to end up.
Oh, okay.
Instead of so management will say it's really crucial for us this quarter to focus on new business, for example, or to extend our offering to this part of the portion of the market. We want to get more deeper into that element because it will broaden the total addressable market, for example, or it will help the top of the funnel. So we need to acquire more leads to come into the platform. That could be one end. The other end could be, it's a pendulum kind of thing. So if we've focused a lot on new business in some quarters, we might swing back to focus on existing customers, making sure that the churn is handled, making sure that existing customer needs are maintained, and focus more on fixing things that might be less sexy to newcomers, but will solve actual pain points of existing customers. So it kind of swings, and based on the direction that we're putting together as a management team, we set off to craft our roadmap.
Okay. And how do you, because one of the things that's always a challenge, and I've seen it in every company, is then how do you fit in time for the non-functional work, the scaling, the technical debt? How do you sort of make that negotiation with your engineering team in terms of your capacity for that work?
Yeah, I have a good partner for the engineering team. The VP engineering and I, we see really eye to eye in these type of things. We work on the capacity of the engineering team ahead of time. So we set aside a certain capacity, a certain bandwidth, if you will, for handling different tech debt and different maintenance issues that we need to handle. That's on the ongoing basis. So we would say, for this quarter, we would put aside 10 to 20% to handle anything that comes in terms of either bugs or just general, maintenance issues. However, larger items have to be dealt with and have to be prioritized against regular product roadmap items.
Right.
So I can give an example. We came into there was a realization that the integration layer that we have in the product, or the integration features that we have in the product were built throughout the time with different patches, and it kind of grew out of hand, and it was really hard to maintain. So instead of just saying we will take the 10% that we decide ahead of time to kind of fix things as they come along, we said, okay, we really need to put aside a significant chunk to redo this entire thing, to refactor it, add an abstraction layer for our integration infrastructure, and kind of deal with it head on. And so it was a discussion between myself and our VP of engineering, and we said, yes, that does make sense, because at the end, we find that there's a lot of customer complaints. We end up finding that we need to, instead of focusing on the roadmap items, there's fires that we need to put out all the time. So we might as well just grab the bull by the horns and kind of fix it once and for all. So it's kind of discussion based.
Okay.
And once the product, the feature, the new part of the product is released, how do you incorporate user feedback into the development? Because it doesn't just stop there, right? And I don't know if you have any example possibly of a major change that was driven by user input.
Yeah, it's a good question. What we try not to do, and we might have erred on that side in the past, is get stuff out and only then realize it's not the right approach. And so we try to be in touch with customers throughout the planning cycle of new features. And before a line of code, because some of the features that we want to roll out are big changes or big modules, and it's in some cases, even an MVP is not going to be a time effort of a week. It's going to be a few months of effort. And so instead of rolling it out and only then realizing that we spent 2 months to roll out something that has no significance or solves the problem in an inefficient way, we're trying to incorporate their feedback as we plan the feature itself. And so one way that we do it, an example that we have, is we have one of the core functions of the platform is managing an approval process for different requests and financial objects that come and that flow through the system. So, for example, an invoice that comes in needs to get approved by the accounting team and maybe the budget owner and maybe some person higher up on the organization.
Yeah.
a request might need to be approved by a direct manager and then the budget owner. And if it's requesting to spend a large amount of money, maybe the CEO needs to be involved. So there's a core element of an approval flow in our system. That approval flow we want to redo it. We want to extend the capability to support our future growth and also significantly improve the user experience around it. It was built in a certain paradigm that did not scale well with us, and we had a different concept that we want to take it to. We went through the motions of how we usually do things. So I was the one leading that initiative. So I put together this one pager, and I thought I had it all in my head of how it's going to solve everything. And this module, this new thing will be the best thing since sliced bread. And, it will solve every single problem that we have in the platform. I showed it to the head of design, and she was also excited. And we started putting together some wireframes, and we showed it to the team, and things went well. And then we started talking to customers and showed them different concepts that we had, and you could see that we had a lot of explaining to do of how this new thing is actually better than the old thing. The old existing system that they have is a known mechanism. They already know the ins and outs. They know how to work around certain things, and the new one did not quite sit well with how they want to do things. And so we realized that, and we tried to do another iteration. We met them again, and then it was interesting because we had a subset of customers, and every time we solved it for a different subset. So we went initially with one subset that it was working well with, and another subset that it didn't work well with. And then we shifted, and then we solved it for these guys and not these guys. So we really had a lot of iterations around this project until we found something that was actually much simpler than we initially set out to. And we haven't gotten to development yet, but we know now that we've collected enough feedback that we feel confident that when we roll it out, we will be much closer to what they actually need.
I see, but that leads me to my next question: to what key performance metrics do you use to evaluate the success of a feature or an update?
It's a good question. So I've worked at B2C companies and I worked at B2B companies, and I always found that in B2C companies, it's actually much easier to track and measure the success of features from just user metrics. One of the companies I worked for, Lightrix, is a very B2C heavy, B2C focused company. And there it's rather easy. You want to launch a feature that gets users to convert and buy the product, for example, or you want to make sure that the retention goes up. There's a certain very tangible metrics that you could look at and measure. In B2B, where the conversion of a prospect to a customer or an upsell of a customer has so many different touch points. Sometimes it's hard to say this is the specific metric I'm tracking, and this, we want to move the needle from 1 to 2 because that's going to improve it. Also, churn is a tricky thing because it's not relied on a very specific metric. So there's a lot of moving pieces and a lot of different elements that needs to be taken into account. That brings me to every feature might have its own unique set of attributes and unique set of metrics that we will look at depending on what the feature is set to solve. So in the case of that approval flow I was mentioning before, and the fact that we wanted to basically do a new version of it, the metrics that we had in mind were right now a lot of the burden of maintaining those approval flows might fall on our CS teams or support teams to help customers set it up for themselves. one of the metrics that we said, new approval flows will minimize the time spent by CSMs on maintaining those trees, those approval flows. Or support tickets is also a good proxy that we might be using to measure the quality of a certain feature. So if we had normalize the number of support tickets per company per domain to X, we want to make sure that by launching this feature, that goes down to by 20% or so on. So there's metrics around it.
Yeah, but like when you're in B2B, because you compared a lot with B2C, the thing in B2B is that you have usually much more customization to make. Like you want to get higher clients, bigger companies to buy your product, and that means they have specific needs. So yeah, they will always tell you that, oh, but it's very useful. I don't understand how you don't have it yet. It will be useful for a lot of other customers, that kind of things. And it's true to an extent, but there's so many of these things that can be useful for others. So to what extent does PayEm platform allow for customization to meet the diverse needs of different clients?
It's a slippery slope, I would say. There's a fine line between being a project company and being a product-led company, and it comes down to what you want to be when you grow up as a product. And if you lose sight of that, you end up having a gazillion different permutations in the product that are very hard to maintain and hard to build on top of. So as much as possible, we're trying to see that when a new prospect comes in, that they fit with what we're trying to solve and who we want to be when we grow up, as opposed to this one-off thing that will just be for them. It's easy to say yes to the first, and it's hard to say no afterwards because it just becomes so unwieldy. Yeah, so it's a challenge.
Yeah, that's so true. I've seen that a lot of these things that you want to say yes to get the client, and then you regret it if you do it, or you have to be careful because where do you draw the line that you start saying stop? So Gilad, we have a tradition in this podcast is that the guests will present a book that they really enjoyed or they recommend other people to read because it changed them. And the one that you send is Difficult Conversations: How to Discuss What Matters Most, by Douglas Stone, Bruce Patton, and one or two others. I think Sheila Hinn. So can you tell us more why this book?
Yeah. I love that book, and I think I gifted it to more than 10 people by now. I think it's when friction happens in the workplace, you usually find that it was due to some communication going awry. I think the book does a really good job at helping people refocus the way that they handle their conversations and not focus on trying to find or push to others your truth, but rather acknowledge that different people perceive the situation in different ways and help you get to this mutual understanding. What I find great about it is that it extends beyond just the workplace to even personal conversations that you might have with your spouse, your kids, your neighbor, and whatnot. But I found it really helpful to communicate better with my colleagues, with the people I manage, with my managers. So I've gifted it to every person that runs into some friction with someone else. I usually buy that book, give it to them and say, look, you have to read it. It really reorients your communication skills in a different way that will allow you to overcome these obstacles.
Yeah, it reminds me of another book I read, which is Crucial Conversations, and it's really like don't be a coward and try to run away from difficult conversations, right?
Yeah, I think one of the best quotes in that book is trying to hold on to difficult conversations and not carry it out is like holding on to a hand grenade after you pulled the pin. So it's great because it will explode at some point, and you just waiting it out. So yeah.
No, I think that's a very good book and good in general. Gareth?
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, it's interesting. I was just having a conversation this morning where I work where there are some communication challenges, right, around certain topics. And I think every company I've been at, certainly tech companies, scale up, whatever, there always seems to be this thing. And it's once you get above, I don't know how many people it is, there must be some number. There always seems to be that challenge. And I think part of it is that different people communicate in different ways, which I'm sure is what's in that book, right? Some people prefer verbal, face-to-face, email. Some people can kind of handle anything. So just, I mean, very briefly, what was the number one thing you learned from that book then?
I think that one of the best things about this book is the way they treat versions of truth. So instead of trying to push a truth to the other side and get and win the argument or win the conversation by having them say, yes, you're correct, I was completely off, is acknowledge that there are two sides of it and each person kind of perceives it differently, and the way to get the other person to see your side of you is just to see how you are experiencing it, as opposed to generalizing and say, you tried to hurt me, you tried to do something wrong, and to generalize on the other person, as opposed to say, I felt hurt, or I felt misunderstood when, or I was trying to do X, and trying to get it from your point of view as opposed to pushing it on the other person.
That's very interesting. And I guess that you know what it is, that comes back, and we've talked on this podcast before, I think it came up with was the whole concept of being empathetic or empathetic, right? However you say that word, and really trying to understand the other person, right? I mean, I think it is so important. So then the question I wanted to ask you, I had a couple of questions actually. So you've been in product, I think, for almost 13 years. And now from the technical perspective, right, from software development perspective, 13 years is like, 100 years in a lot. I mean, the change has been massive in 13 years from a software development point of view. What's it look like from a product point of view? Has that change been equally big in the product sphere, do you think?
Yes, I'll say that my experience even extends beyond that, because I started my product management roughly 20 years ago in a different setting.
Okay.
And that was a military setting. And yes, I could see the change happen throughout those 20 years, where 20 years ago, the product management practice was, I set with myself to write this humongous, lengthy PRD that tried to take into account every single permutation of what needs to happen and dictated to the finest element. And only then headed out to the people next in line. So it was a waterfall to the extreme, and projects would take ages because of that. Because I had to give it to someone who would then have to read it and give it back for reviews. And there was a lot of and in some cases you would launch something only to realize that you were way late to the market, or wrong with the demand and everything. And so I could see how things become more and more agile throughout that time, and the cycles. If back then you would release something after 6 months of working on it, even if it wasn't just a waterfall type of product, you would still end up showing to the market after 6 months of work. Now, you push to production several times a day, and you decide on the subset of your customers that will get it and not get it based on different feature flags and whatnot. So the cycle has become so rapid that I have an ongoing conversation with my VP of CS, my colleague, who wants us to slow down, and we want to accelerate. So it's this constant debate.
Yeah. Funnily enough, that was just the discussion I had this morning. Was a feature that we pushed out that our sales team didn't realize had happened, and they were doing a demo. And they're like, "Why does this look different to what I thought it looked like?" Right? But again, from our CEO's perspective on down, it's like features as fast as possible. And just getting everybody to keep up with that is quite challenging, the comms perspective. And then, again, just talking a bit about your product background, because your background is kind of hardcore electrical engineering, right? Digital signal processing, bioelectronics. What sort of led you then to go into the product space?
I found myself more drawn to the business aspect of the tech industry. I liked the technology. I love it. I taught myself to code back in high school. My dad was an electrical engineer, so this is the house I grew up in, was very tech oriented. But I found myself, even though I enjoyed that aspect of the tech, I really was drawn to the why and the business side of things and the revenue and how things kind of flow in that sense. And so throughout my undergrad, I ended up working for a market research company and then a consulting company, a strategic consulting company, to get a more rounder background and see how those how the sausage is made in certain cases. So that was kind of the what led me further on to to dive into product and as opposed to hardcore tech.
And then my last question was: so you were at a fintech event. I saw a blog, or I think it was a podcast you were on about it, called "The Next Generation of Enterprise Finance." So what would you regard that as being? What would you sort of? I mean, obviously, PayEm you would say is representing that. What is that, and how is it different to what the last generation was? Let's say.
I think you can see that trend happening in a lot of business applications, and I think fintech is no exception. Where in the past, the persona that it was solving for were admins and people that were professionals, and you could see employees and laymen joining, those journeys, and you could see how the design language is changing and how the usability of these products is changing. So as opposed to cater for an accountant that really knows how to deal with everything and could dodge every curveball that you throw at him because they know what's behind the scenes and what those different acronyms are and the different whatever finance words you want to use. In a case of employees, you really need to simplify it, and I don't think fintech is an exception. I think I worked in the past in HR tech. I work now in fintech. I think it happens all over again, where you really want the end user to have the greatest experience as they're used to from their consumer apps on their phone. There's no reason for them to have their Instagram, their Facebook, their TikToks on the same phone that they open their business app and have a crappy experience. That's not what they expect. They expect the same level of high quality design, high quality experience.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Okay.
I mean, I guess on this we're going to close this podcast, Gilad. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And for anybody listening, we'll be back in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.